name is Nicholas Horvath, and I'm here to tell you the Hungarian folktale called the Sun Horse. In a distant land far away, there was a horse, a sun horse to be more specific, who illuminated the entire country for the people living in it. One day, a witch came by and stole the sun horse, and the land was stricken with darkness. So, in retaliation, the king and his men traveled all across the land to try and find the sun horse and bring light back to their kingdom. They didn't manage to find the sun horse, but they did happen to find a cottage in the middle of the woods. This was beneficial because living in the cottage was a seer, and this seer knew everything about anything. And luckily, he even knew about the sun horse's whereabouts. So, the king recruited the seer, and all the seer needed was a servant to help him travel across the land and find the sun horse. Well, the seer and the servant set off, and they traveled across many countries until they finally arrived in the country where the sun horse was taken to. The kingdom in this country was ruled by 3 brothers, each having a queen, which were sisters, and their mother was a witch, the very same witch that stole the sun horse. Well, the seer needed to gather intel and needed to know which king or anyone had the sun horse. Well, what he did is he turned himself into a bird, and he flew his way to each window, and he tapped on each window until each queen answered. When they did, she allowed him to sit on their forearm, and in passing, when talking about the marvelous beauty of this bird, told the seer when their husbands or the kings were coming home. Luckily, each king was coming home the same day, but at different times during that same day. So, taking this back, he quickly arranged for a way to somehow trap these kings. He thought of the idea of hiding under a bridge. This is the only way to get to the castle, so the kings would have to go over it in order to get to the castle. So he hid under the bridge, and in early morning, the oldest king finally arrived. And when he did, the seer jumped out, knocked the king off his horse, and they began sword fighting. They did for some time, however, the seer won with ease, and eventually strapped the dead body of the king to the horse, and the horse dragged it back to the castle. Some time passed, and the second king arrived, the second oldest king. When he did, the seer did the exact same thing. He knocked him off his horse, except this time, this king put up more of a fight. He was much better with the sword. But still, the seer became victorious. And just as before, he tied the king to the horse, and the horse dragged it back to the castle. Since both horses now were not the sun horse, the youngest son, which was soon to come, had to have the sun horse. When the youngest king went over the bridge, the seer knocked him off his horse, just like before, but this time the sword fight was very long. They fought for a long, long time with no winning on either end. So they proposed a challenge. The first of which was to roll on a wheel down a very dangerous hill until one of them died. Well, since both of them crashed, but both of them survived, they had to impose a different challenge. Instead, the seer set them both on fire, but differentiating by the color of the flame. And they would burn each other until one of them died. The seer would be the blue flame, and the king would be the red flame. And they burned each other for hours and hours and hours, until finally, an old beggar came along. And the king asked the beggar that if he gave him a penny, he would put up the blue flame, which was the seer. And the seer told the beggar that if he gave him a shilling, then he would put up the blue flame, or put up the red flame. So, because a shilling was worth more, the beggar decided to pour water on the red flame. And the red flame was extinguished, so the king died. Having this victory, the seer got the sun horse, and he and the servant began their travel back to their kingdom. However, the dangers were not done yet. because the witch had made all of the queens, her daughters, into treacherous traps to trick the seer and the servant into their deaths. But the seer wasn't falling for this. On the way, the servant happened to notice a red apple tree, beautiful, marvelous, and the servant was so hungry he couldn't resist to grab an apple, but the seer profusely told him not to. And to prove his point, he thrust a sword into the trunk of this tree, and it began bleeding, thus signifying he was right. It was the blood of the queen. They moved on, and eventually they came onto a magnificent stream, shimmering and shining in all its glory. Once again, the servant wanted so bad to drink from the stream, but he couldn't, because the seer knew that this was another trap. It was another queen. So he thrust his sword into the stream, and the stream ran red. Finally, they came across a beautiful rose garden. But the servant, now catching on at this point, knew that it was a trap. And so once again, the seer thrust his sword into the bushes, and it began to bleed. Finally, out of traps, they were home free. And they got home, and instantly the country was illuminated. And it stayed that way. The king tried and profusely wanted to give the seer a reward, but the seer refused. He was very content with what he did for his country, and instead of getting a reward, he just returned home and was never seen again. And from that day forth, the country was forever illuminated.